Morning, guys. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about my first tattoo and how I may never have got it. Um, I spoken a little bit about this on my podcast and some other things here or there, but I actually wasn't planning on getting any tattoos for the first half of my life. Um, I didn't have a single tattoo until I was a bit older than most people start. I got my first tattoo when I was 20, and I guess most people would assume I got my first tattoo when I was like 16 or whatever, or even earlier. Like a lot of people I know get started when they're 13 even. They get some crap on their arm or something that they later end up like covering or whatever. But their tattoo experience ends up starting quite a bit earlier than mine did. I had piercings long before I had tattoos, for example. By the time I had my first tattoo, I had, I don't know, probably over 50 different piercings up to that point. And I was always way more interested in piercings than tattoos in general. I found them a better way to customize and just modify yourself. Stretching them was a lot funner for me, even than getting pierced, for example. But as time went on, things happened that changed my opinions on tattoos. I kind of felt maybe like a little bit of a hipster at first with it, where I knew a lot of people with tattoos, and so maybe that was part of the reason why I didn't really want one. But they were also never really taboo for me either, because my dad had a couple of tattoos when I was young. He had a big dragon on his arm and, a bear on his back and stuff like that. So my stepdad had an eagle on his arm, and so I always just seen them as I was growing up, and they weren't really all that risky to me, I guess, like they would be for some people. Didn't feel like a rebellious thing to me or anything like that. I didn't get my first tattoo until I was expecting my son to be born. Um, I was with the same girl for 5 years when I was very young, and she had Crohn's disease, and later she developed cancer in her stomach. But at the time, we had had a miscarriage already, and so when we ended up having or when she ended up pregnant again and carrying it almost 6 months, I decided that I wanted to get a tattoo to celebrate the fact that I was going to be a father. I wanted to get my son's name tattooed on my arm because it was kind of a miracle that he was born. So for me, my first tattoo ever was very, very meaningful and cathartic in a way, because I never really thought that we would be able to have my son because, as I said, his mother was in bad health generally. So a lot of my life was spent in and out of hospitals with her when I was young, and just kind of helping take care of her. And pretty well every dollar I had at that point was going towards us and hoping to put her through college one day, because she had a dream to go to college and all these things. So the early part of my life was much less financially free, and also, yeah, just I didn't really have any good reason to care about tattooing because I was so wrapped up in someone else's life at that point. So when my son was born, we ended up naming him after my grandfather, who I never met, but he was said to be a great man by everyone who knew him that really cared about his family. My dad's mother was schizophrenic, and her husband, my grandfather, would take care of the kids because she was unable to. But one day he died on the road and left the kids to themselves, kind of thing. So my grandfather was, the only good positive influence in their life. And so I wanted some way to commemorate that old story, and that would be by naming my son after him. So it was in a way honoring my dad and the life that he did, or he lived when he was young, by naming him that. Anyway, so I ended up getting that name on my forearm. It was done in a custom font that I came up with on my own. I didn't end up getting the exact font, though. It was cleaned up quite a bit because I'm not the best at drawing. I always had a great imagination, but what came out on page wasn't exactly what I intended to be there, kind of thing. So it was done with all these different stars around it, and the eye was a sword, and it was really hard to read unless you knew what it said. It was one of those kinds of fonts. And I don't have that tattoo anymore, but it's not because I didn't like it. It's actually one of my favorite tattoos I've ever got. And in general, I like to think that the first tattoo you get should be one that's pretty meaningful. There's some debate over whether tattoos need to have meaning or not, but I don't think that they do need to. But I think that for the first one, it should be something fairly meaningful or something you're proud of or something like that. And then after that, kind of go nuts, is my opinion on it. Anyway, that tattoo is actually worked into my first left sleeve before it got blacked out. It was covered up already, so it wasn't part of the blackout or anything like that. It's just that I got my first tattoo, like a lot of people do, right here on my left forearm. That's usually a spot people like to get their first tattoos on, but it's probably actually not a great idea, because if you're ever going to do sleeves, it's going to be in the way. So if I could take back where I put it, I probably would have put it maybe on my side of my head or something. Even though that's not a great place to start getting tattooed, it's easier workaround than it is your left forearm. So we often don't have the foresight or the long-term vision when we're young. That is one thing I will give credence to some tattoo critics about, is that young people don't have a lot of that you don't look ahead very well when you're young, we'll say. But I don't consider that a bad thing, because it can all work out anyway. Long before the blackout, it was already worked into a full color sleeve, and it looked really good. So it didn't end up hurting me that much, but it was something to work around. I never really thought I would have sleeves, though. I thought I would be the kind of guy who had just a few tattoos, and that'd be it. And that was kind of all I had money for quite a while in my life. For after I was with my son's mother, I was in another relationship, and then another relationship. And most of these women that I was with didn't have jobs, or I would be the only income. So I didn't really have much money to spend on tattoos. So I would only get one, like kind of like 1 or 2 a year, or 3 or 4 a year for quite a long time. And it wasn't until about late 2015, when I was on my own and I had my own money and I didn't really have to worry about paying for anyone else's bills, that I finally realized that I was actually in a pretty good spot financially to start getting tattoos that I wanted for years. Ideas that I had when I was very young that I couldn't really incorporate into my life until much later. So that's probably why it ramped up so quickly in some people's eyes, where I went from having quite a few tattoos. Like I had my rose mantle, and I had my throat tattooed, and a bunch on my arms and stuff, on my chest and stuff like that. But they were just scattershot tattoos. People saw me within that year, from 2015, 2016, start getting covered really, really quick with all kinds of stuff that some of it I wanted for a long time, and other things were just to fill space, because I started getting the real itch to get tattooed. Now I have the money. Now I have the drive. Let's get this done, kind of thing. And I packed on fast. And it was a little weird seeing myself change, even for me, because I felt like I would never do that. I never really expected to have that kind of coverage. But it all started with one. Like people always say, what made you wake up and want to look like that? It's like, wake up and want to look like that? This is a lifelong pursuit to some extent. You do one, you do one, you do one, you end up somewhere. You know, you don't eat an elephant in one bite, as they say. It takes a long time. But I'm happy to have started with a really important one, and have the great story of getting my son's name tattooed on my left arm as my first tattoo. Because when I think back on it, even today, it maps on for me, because my son has been the main focus of my life. And There's been times when being a young dad has been a big problem for me, or it's been really hard for my life. But um, owning that and really taking it in and living through it and getting to the other side where it started hard and now it's easy, um, it was a really important part of my character. And that's actually part of why I still show off pictures of me and my son on my social media too, where a lot of people don't show that stuff. For me, it's a huge part of who I am. And it's not just because I love being a dad or he's such a great son or anything like that, but it's also because it all may not have even happened. I may never have had that boy. Um, his mother was, as I said, very ill, and he was born 2.5 months premature, and he only weighed about 2 pounds. So he had all kinds of complications. Um, and he was quite small for his age for a long time. He had a hole in his heart and all these different things. So for me, he was a miracle that he was even able to be born. And his mother actually, bless her heart, even though we weren't together, she passed away back in 2016. And since we separated, I was there with him three days a week-ish kind of thing for most of his early life. But when she passed away, our relationship became a lot more because now I was clearly his only parent, and now he's living with me kind of thing. So it ended up being a lot more important to me even than it was the bond that we had and the story that we kind of shared. So my first tattoo in general is a great part of my whole life, and obviously I'll be his father forever. And so I've had people ask me if I didn't like that tattoo and that's why I covered it up or anything like that. It's got nothing to do with that. I'm not embarrassed about it or anything like that. I didn't dislike it. It's just you don't need to you don't need to keep that there to know that it was there. Like for me, the memory of having a tattoo sometimes is as important as having the tattoo be visible to the entire world. In my way of thinking, the things that I've covered, I still have. I just have more now. It's like just because you left a house, you moved to a new house, doesn't mean you never lived in that house or that it wasn't important to you. It just means that you're moving on and you're doing something else, right? So my way of thinking is that as long as you keep the memory of that thing, it's still important. It doesn't change its importance or anything like that. So yeah, that's the story of my first tattoo. If you had told me when I got my first tattoo that one day I would be approaching 900 hours or whatever it is of tattooing and be working on a third bodysuit, I might not have believed it because, as I said, being young and a little bit, not as, we'll say, wise or worldly or whatever, I used to think of tattoos much differently than I do now. And obviously that's just one of those things that people change as they grow. And I've changed a lot and I've learned a lot. And I think tattooing is always going to be a part of my life in some way now. So I don't think that there was any reality where I wouldn't end up at least fully covered once, even if I had have stayed with women that were not financially secure and things like that. I think eventually I would have just kept picking away at it until I had at least one full body suit. It was just lucky enough for me that when I met my wife, Sarah, around 5 years ago now, it was lucky for me that she was financially secure enough for me to finally explore some of my own desires and actually indulge in some of my own interests rather than having to spend all my money paying bills for 2 people, 3 people, whatever. Anyway, yeah, that's the story of how I almost never got tattooed and how I didn't think I would be as tattooed as I am now and how it all started for me. So I hope you found this entertaining or enjoyable in some way, and I'll talk to you again soon.